Welcome to lesson 3.8. Today we're going to look at the basics of chemical equations. A chemical equation describes a chemical change. When we look at a chemical equation, we're just looking at the reorganization of the atoms. Atoms are neither created nor destroyed, they're just rearranged. When you write a chemical equation, you write the reactants on the left side of the arrow and the products on the right side of the arrow. So anything on the left is what you start with, anything on the right is what you end up with. Occasionally there'll be something written on the arrow that represents some things that need to happen in order for the reaction to proceed. Again, I mentioned earlier that any atom in the reactants must be accounted for in the products. We do this by balancing a chemical equation, and we're going to get into this in much more depth in the next lesson, but I encourage students to do an atom inventory. And so up here, so let's look at this one first. What we have is we have in this one only 2 oxygens. So we have 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens, and 2 oxygens on the reactant side. On the product side, we have 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and we have a total of 3 oxygens. So what we need to do is we need to work back and forth to balance that, and when we do balance it, we finally end up having 4 oxygens here, 4 hydrogens there, and 4 oxygens there. So that's what this balancing does. It makes us have the same number and types of atoms on each side of the chemical equation. Another thing when you look at chemical equations that you'll see is you'll see symbols that represent the state, the physical state of the reactant and product. And this can be especially important. So for example, if we look at this compound, it makes a difference if it's this as opposed to this. It makes a difference in naming it because the top one is hydrogen chloride, the bottom one is hydrochloric acid. It also makes a difference in terms of whether or not you want to be in the room. You don't want to be in the room when this is generated, but hydrochloric acid is a much, although not totally safe, but it's a much safer thing to work with than hydrogen chloride gas. But S in parentheses represents a solid, an L represents a liquid, and most of the time I'll do a little cursive L simply so that it doesn't look like a 1. A G represents a gas, and AQ means it's dissolved in an aqueous solution. The whole purpose of balancing a chemical equation is to make sure that you obey the law of conservation of mass, and we do that by balancing that equation. And so next time we're going to look at how to actually balance those equations. But just remember from this lesson that reactants are always on the left hand side of the arrow and products are always on the right hand side of the arrow. And that concludes lesson 3.8. We'll work on balancing chemical equations when we get together next time.